In this video, I'm going to build a super simple JavaScript project that allows you to sum two numbers together. And I'm going to use this to teach you a little bit about arrow functions and events. So let's get right into it. First, I'm going to do the HTML here for my page. I'm going to type here mini calculator inside of an H1 tag. And then I'm going to have a div with class operation. So everything that is handled by the operation is going to be inside of here. Here I'm going to have two inputs. The type is going to be number. I'm going to add here a placeholder of 0. And the ID here is going to be first number, like so. And I'm going to duplicate this line and change here first to second. So we're going to have two inputs for both numbers, okay? Then I'm going to have here a span with the plus operator. I'm going to give this an ID of operator, like so. Actually, let's give here a class instead of ID of operator, okay? So this is going to give us the little operator right there. Then we're going to have another div for the result. So let's give here a class of result. This is going to have an H1 tag with the text result, and the ID here is going to be result as well. But before that, we're going to have here a button with an equal sign, and let's give this an ID of equal btn, like that. Okay, so that is the HTML for our page. I have a CSS style. I'm going to paste that right there. I apologize for not explaining this. I really hate to do that. I added some comments so that you can understand if you want to analyze this, but I generally think this is not the most important part here. So let's get straight into our JavaScript logic here, okay? So once more, I apologize, and let's just keep going. So I'm going to add here to my button something called an event listener. So I'm going to type on, and as you can see, I have a bunch of options here. I have on change, on click, on drag. I have key presses, key releases. I have mouse movement, all of those things. Here I'm going to type on click. Okay, so this is going to be our event handler. Our event listener. So this is constantly checking if a certain event is happening, okay? It's listening for that event. And the event that we're going to listen for here is going to be clicking the button. So that's why it's called on click, okay? And inside of these quotation marks, I'm going to call the function that's going to be my event handler, okay? So my event handler is essentially a function that's going to be called when my event listener detects the event. So I'm going to say here addNumbers. Okay, so we're listening for the click event, and if that happens, we're going to call the event handler addNumbers, okay? So now, in order to actually define this, I'm going to create here a script tag with a function addNumbers, like so. And here, I'm just going to console.log event handler, like that, so that you can actually see that when I come here and I click on my button, it's going to say event handler. So when I click on my button, the event handler is going to be correctly called. Now, obviously, this is not the logic that I want to put in here. So let's actually do this. I'm going to say const first number is equal to document.getElement by ID. And here the ID is going to be first number. Okay, so that's going to be our first number. I'm going to duplicate this line, and instead of first, I'm going to say here second. Oops, not this. So this is going to get both of our inputs, and now I also need to get the result. So I'm going to say const result equals document.getElement by ID, and here the ID is going to be result, like so. Okay, so now that we have all of our tags, let's actually make this sum the numbers, okay? So as you might recall, to access what's inside of an HTML tag, you could use inner HTML. So I'm going to say result.innerHTML, and I still want to keep my result text. So I'm going to say result plus, and then first number. And here, we're not going to use inner HTML, okay? Because this is an input tag. And for input tags, if you want to access the value that's inside of them, you're going to access the value property and not inner HTML or inner text or anything like that, okay? So I'm going to do the same thing for the second number. So this is going to sum the string results with the value of the first number and the value of the second number. Now let me actually close the console because we don't need it for now. And let's actually test this. I'm going to say 10 on the first number, 20 on the second. And when I click the button, this is going to call this addNumbers function. However, this is not actually adding the numbers, it's just concatenating them together. So essentially it's writing one number and then it's writing the other number in front. And that's because this is actually a string, okay? So the dot value property is going to convert the value of the input tag into a string. And when you add strings together, it's not going to actually add the value of the strings if they are numbers. It's just going to put them, together into a single string. So if I actually want to do this, I need to grab this and I need to convert it with a number to a number with the number function, like that, okay? So this is going to convert both of these to numbers. However, once more, if I do this and I click on my result, this is not going to give us the expected result. That's because it has to do with the order of operations. So first, this is going to sum the string to this number. And when that happens, it's going to convert the number into a string and concatenate it to this string. And then it's going to do the same thing for the second number. So if I actually want to sum them together, I need to do this operation first. So I'm going to add parentheses here. And then after I've added the numbers, then it's going to put the value inside of this string. Okay, so now this hopefully should work. Let me say 10, 21. And when I click here on the button, this is going to give me the correct result. Now, the last thing I want to do here in my function is I want to clear the values here of my inputs after I calculate, their sum. So in order to do that, it's really easy. I'm going to say first number dot value equals an empty string and second number dot value equals an empty string, okay? So after I've done my operation like so, and I click equal, the the value of the input tags is going to disappear, okay? It's going to be cleared. So that is our addNumbers function. Now, this is actually not the best way to add an event listener to an HTML tag. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm actually going to use something called the addEventListener function. So the first thing I need to do here is grab the button. So I'm going to say, const btn is going to be document.getElement, get element by ID, and I'm going to have the ID here of equal btn, like so. So I'm grabbing the button. And then I'm going to say btn.addEventListener. And in here, I'm going to put two things. I'm going to put the event I'm listening for, and this is going to be click. And I remember this was super confusing for me in the beginning because I didn't really understand where this click keyword was coming from. But just keep in mind that this is built in, okay? If you add the keyword click to the addEventListener function, if you pass it to the function, JavaScript is going to recognize this as the click event, okay? So I hope that's clear. And the second thing is I need to add the event handler. So I'm going to say addNumbers, and this is going to add an event listener that's going to listen for the event click, and it's going to add the numbers. Now notice that I'm not calling addNumbers inside of here. I'm not doing this. And that's because this takes in a function, and it's going to call that function from inside of this addEventListener function, right? So this is actually a really interesting property in JavaScript because functions are higher order objects, which means they can be passed into other functions and called from those functions. So I can have something like a function called call hello, and this is going to take in a hello function. And it's literally just going to call hello fn like that, okay? So this takes in a function and calls that function. And then I can have another function called hello fn like that. And this is just going to console.log here, hello, for example. Okay, and let me just type hello correctly. And so essentially what this is going to do when I say call hello like that, with the hello fn as a parameter, this is going to grab this hello fn function, pass it in here into my call hello, and it's going to call that function from inside of there, right? So if I actually inspect here and open my console, as you can see, this is going to output hello. Okay, so that is how calling functions inside of functions works. And this is essentially what's going to happen inside of our addEventListener. So this is an example of how addEventListener would look like. This would take in an event type like that and an event handler like that. And it would do something like this. If the event happens with the event type like that, then I'm going to call my event handler like this. So this is an example of how event listener would work. It would take in an event type, an event handler. If that event of that type happens, we're going to call the event handler. So if I call my function in here, this is going to get the result of my function, the return value, which in this case would be undefined because we're not returning anything. And here it would try to call undefined, which would obviously not work because that's not callable. So if I want to add this as an event handler, I can't call it inside of my addEventListener. Okay. So just to check that this works, let me say 10, 21, and when I click on my button, this is going to give me the correct result. Okay, so that's addEventListener. Now it's really annoying that every time I want to add these numbers, I need to sum them together. So I need to click on this equal sign button. I don't want to have to do that. I want to click enter, and that's going to sum the numbers for me. So I'm going to say document.body.addEventListener. So we're going to add an event listener to the whole page, to the whole body. And here, the event type is going to be keydown. Okay, so when a keydown event happens, we're going to call a certain function. And here, we're going to say function handler like that. And this is going to take in a built-in object called event. And the event is essentially going to have the properties that our event has. So in this case, the properties of our keydown event are going to be stored inside of this built-in event object, or whatever you want to call it. And inside of here, I can access those properties. So I can say, for example, console.log event dot, and these are all the things that our event contains. And in this case, I'm going to pick key here, and I'm going to go here to inspect again to my console. I'm going to type 10 here on my first input, so 10. And as you can see the keys that I pressed. If I press enter, it's going to say enter. And this is the exact key that I want to use in here. So I'm going to add another if, and I'm sorry if this is confusing. I'm going to teach you if statements in a later video, but it literally just checks if this condition is true. If it is, it executes some block of code. Okay, so I'm going to check if event.key is equal to enter, which is, you saw the name of the enter key. Then I'm going to add numbers. I'm going to call this add number function. And here I'm actually going to call it because the handler is going to be this function handler, okay? And now this should work. I'm going to say 10, I'm going to say 21, and, oh, sorry, I clicked on the button. I didn't mean to do that, 21. And if I click enter, there you go. This is going to give me the same result. Let me try it with different numbers. For example, -10. And if I click enter, this is going to give me the correct result. Okay, perfect. Now, this is actually not needed. This name right here is actually not needed. We're never going to access this function by its name. We're literally just passing it to addEventListener. When it listens to the keydown event, it's going to call this function. And we don't actually need this name. We can just remove it. And this is going to be what's called an anonymous function. This is a function that doesn't have a name because it doesn't really need a name, right? It doesn't need a name because we're not using that name to access it. And as you can see, if I type here 1 and 12 and I click enter, this is still going to work. So this is an anonymous function. Now, I'm actually deceiving you a little bit here because this is not the way that you would actually do this. In here, instead of not an actual function, but instead of using the keyword function, you would actually use something called an arrow function. And an arrow function looks something like this. It has the parameters inside of parentheses, then an arrow, and then the body of the function. So let me type here console.log. This is an arrow function like that. Okay, so this is going to be an arrow function, and usually what we do is we're going to have a const here which is going to contain this function. So it's going to store this function inside of this hello constant. And if I type here hello, and let me once again open my console, All right, this is going to output hello, and then this is an arrow function. This wasn't a great name for this function, but you get what I mean. And this type of functions has some really important properties, which I'm not going to talk about in this video because it's going to be like super long. But this is essentially how you would define an arrow function. So instead of this, I'm going to type parentheses here. I'm still going to pass in my event, but this time this is going to be an arrow function and the body is going to be here, okay? So just to show you that this still works, I'm going to type 10, 29, and if I click enter, this is still going to give me the correct result. And you would usually pass, when you're passing functions to addEventListener, you would usually pass an arrow function, okay? All right, now the last thing I want to show you is the removeEventListener. Okay, so if I type here a couple of numbers, it's always 10, the first number. But anyways, if I click on equal sign, it is still going to, perform the operation because I still have this event listener here on my button. But down here, I'm going to say btn like that, dot remove event listener. Like that. And this is going to once again take in the event, and it's also going to take in the function, the event handler. Okay, so now if I type here a couple of numbers and I click on my button, you can see that nothing happens because I removed the event listener. However, if I type enter, this is still going to perform the operation. Now the thing is, remove event listener only works if you've added this event listener with the addEventListener function. In this case, we have done that. So we have added event listener with the addEventListener function. So remove event listener is going to work. However, if I had here an on-click event listener that is going to add the numbers for me, this would still add the numbers when I click the button, right? Because remove event listener doesn't work if you pass it the parameter into the button tag. Okay. All right. Now the last thing I want to tell you is that addEventListener allows you to add multiple event listeners for the same tag or for the same event in the same tag or for different events in the same tag. That is why addEventListener is usually the best practice when you want to add event listeners to your tags, okay? All right, so this is all I wanted to show you today. I hope you enjoyed the project. I apologize for not explaining, once again, the styles part. But I generally think that's not very important. So this is what it looks like. This is what we've learned. And yeah, that is it. That is all I had to show you today. If you liked it, please like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.